So, Kevin, you're doing our service today,
Yes,
right?
yes.
About World AIDS Day,
World
right?
AIDS Day, and I'd like to
Okay.
make it a message to PHAs, that's people having AIDS.
Okay.
Are we starting or? Because,
We can. Yeah, it's 9.
okay,
Maybe
I had
Charlie
a
could
reading
pray.
done a couple of weeks ago by Terry, and it
Oh,
it was amazing. It went on for a solid hour, and it was all about AIDS. So that inspired me to chat today. Uh, AIDS, uh, we all know that AIDS was devastating for the world and especially our community. And it was aggravated by people like Pat Robertson, Jerry Falwell, Jimmy Swaggart. Uh, they intentionally made it as cruel as possible. Oh, sorry, I missed. Can you see that? I missed admitting. Okay, she's in. I had hit the wrong button. Anyway, so AIDS was aggravated incredibly bad, and 800,000 people died in the US before President Reagan would even utter the words. 30,000 people died in Canada before our Prime Minister was even able to utter the words, let alone do anything. It wasn't much better in the UK. Between Thatcher, Reagan, and Mulroney, who was our prime minister at the time, AIDS ran rampant for 8 years before anything was done. And it could have been what could have changed if it had been started day one. But then when I saw what happened with COVID, who's surprised? Uh, but the community came around and we had to totally rebuild our community. The powers that be spiritually destroyed our community, and it was intentional. When when it comes to sin, according to the church, we're covered under grace to forgive us of our sins so we can go to heaven. Not in the gay community. There is no grace afforded to homosexuals if that is what they claim is the sin. And the only message that they would give is, we love you dearly, but you must stop all this. You must be miserable for the rest of your life. You can't even talk to gay people. Like it became crazy. Meanwhile, thousands of people are dying all over the place. We're protesting in the streets. We're screaming to make somebody listen. And uh when the first AIDS death took place, I was still working as a bartender, and all of a sudden I got a message that one of my customers had died. He went in the hospital on Tuesday and he was dead by Thursday. And no one knew what it was. Well, it just happened that in the next month or so, I started working at a funeral home and we started getting AIDS patients coming in and whatever. But we had an issue. Um, same-sex partners were not legally recognized, and so for them to come in and arrange a funeral, it had to be up to the former bitter spouse and estranged families to make and they had all the legal say. And a lover could have been lovers for 30 years and he was out in the cold. The families would sweep in and seize everything in the house and claim it as the deceased person's estate, leaving the partner totally destitute. So that's why I say it was the damage was intentional. And at the time, we were in the battle for human rights. And the general consensus was, well, you don't deserve human rights because God has already proven you don't deserve them because he's punishing you with AIDS. And that attitude still is around today in a couple of circles. And they weaponized the word spouse because hospital visitation had said that only spouses are allowed to visit the sick. And this is back 50 or 40 years ago when hospital visitation was done on a very strict basis, 2 in the room, only spouse and immediate family, whatever. And partners didn't qualify. And so then, especially church-run hospitals took it to court and declared that same-sex partners could not be qualified as spouse because the law didn't say so. And it was exacerbated over and over and over. If anything, it was a key component to us achieving human rights. All we wanted was to bury our loved ones and inherit what was rightly ours. And the courts wouldn't allow that. So we had to go to court years and years and years and years, and it just made the devastation of the AIDS crisis even worse. So we had, in the funeral homes, we had families coming to us, and they were totally devastated. Their deep, dark secret had just died, and everyone would know they died of AIDS. And at that time, it was ultimate shame and disgust and repulsion, you name it. Every word was thrown at us. And, but we had to do this fine juggling between fulfilling the wishes of the family and separately the wishes of the surviving spouse. Quite a few times, the families cooperated and the outcomes were good. I have seen funerals and witnessed funerals where the partner was barred from the funeral service, funeral home, and anything to do. And it was barred by a bitter family member who was out to clobber us with any legal thing that they could find. But an odd thing happened. Funeral homes became the epicenter of the gay rights movement because we started recognizing the spouse. There was a delicate dance always done. But a lot, my boss just said, well, pay attention to the spouse unless the family really kicks up a legal stank. And so that started to change. And traditionally, funerals do not change over centuries, and especially over generations. The way they did it 200 years ago is still the same way we did it in 1955. But an odd thing happened because our funerals were barred from most churches. Because homosexuality was a sin that didn't qualify under grace, we were not allowed to be in the church. And the most egregious was, I remember once where the father led us in the church and he stood there and preached for a solid hour as into how this man was going to burn in hell and the family was going to go with him because they loved him. Your sin was guilt by association. Need I tell you, it was devastating for the family. And I bet you they still haven't cured today. They still haven't felt any better. And then I became positive in 85, December 23rd of 85. And up until that point, my own spirituality had been fairly battered. And because when I came out, I faced the same condemnation and cruelty, all under the guise of Christian concern for my soul. And they made life they totally destroyed any spiritual worth I had. And this is just after Bible college. So it was pretty impactful. Then, so right after I zero converted, I was down on myself and you name it, do I opt for suicide? Because I knew what was coming. At that point, when you were diagnosed, you were probably dead within 6 months. There was no medication, no treatment, nothing coming from a medical community that didn't care. And I shouldn't say that broadly. There were some very good people who did care, and we can almost name them on one hand. It was that bad. So and as I said, my spirituality was pretty well devastated or suppressed, because it was almost like being in the closet again. I wouldn't, my spirituality affected my work, but it didn't give me I didn't have the confidence in my spirituality, because word after word after word told me why I didn't deserve any kind of spirituality or grace from God. And then I read a quote, and it was about religious people always tell you you're going to hell. Spiritual people have already been there. And that clicked in my head. And I can remember I was reading it at the funeral, and it just clicked. And at that point on, I decided, screw this. I'm not letting anyone define my faith. Because the way I thought at that point was sin was anything that came between me and God. And because of my resentment, it affected my relationship with God only because I let them affect my relationship. And so then I decided, you're not gonna get me, and became an AIDS activist. Well, I was a half AIDS activist before that, but then I went into it full hilt, and I was lucky. I was able to learn at the feet of all these ministers that I was dealing with on a daily basis. I could I could be dealing with 10 different clergy in the run of a day. And I heard sermon after sermon, and a lot of it was not what you want to hear. There was always a certain amount of shame buried into the funeral home, into the funeral service. And just the other day, I was searching for something online, and sure enough, it popped up that uh, I was destined to go to hell because there was no forgiveness available to me unless I lived a celibate life, and I was miserable all the days of my life. But you have a chance if you happen to get married and have children and pretend you're normal. That's the message still out there today. So just yeah, and so then my spirituality really improved considerably. I felt uh, I claimed God's love, even though no one was giving it to me. I claimed it, and that's the same message I'm delivering today. Is that people with AIDS and their families can claim eternal, I'm going to use the term eternal life because that's what I'm familiar with. That our access to eternal life is as good as anyone else I'm talking to. We're all equal in the eyes of God. And Jerry Falwell can't tell me different. Pat Robertson can't tell me different. And anyway, 38 years later, I'm still here and able to look down on their grave, and that gives me a certain amount of satisfaction. And then so my spirituality was doing pretty good, and it was advancing as it should be. And then I moved to Ottawa. And at that time, I had basically burned out from working at the funeral home because, I mean, you work 70 hours a week, and a lot of those were AIDS funerals, which were really hard. And so by the time I moved to Ottawa, I had burned out from funeral service. And then, of course, I got sick. I came down with PML. That's short for progressive multifocal leukoencephalopathy. I still can't get my tongue around half that. Uh, and I was bedridden for 2 years. I could get to appointments, but it took three people carrying me. And I had all this time to lay in bed that all I could do was watch TV, smoke, and sleep. And I smoked at the time. I've since quit. But a program came on TV called Crossing Over. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, with what's his name? John Edward. And he was doing meetings in the rounds with families. And he was a psychic, he was a medium, and he was bringing through loved ones of the people in the audience. Well, the first thing he started bringing through AIDS patients who had passed over. And I thought, wow, that was, to me, that was a testament to my faith that, oh, I believe, I believe that they have could cross over, but this was a confirmation to that. So 2 years I was bedridden. That program came on 3 times a day, and I watched it religiously, inside and out, backwards, and realized that, okay, I had proof that I was going to go to heaven no matter what happened in the process. And that was a big revelation. So then when I got back on my feet, I started working with the AIDS Committee of Ottawa. And every now and then, when I could, I would inject a certain amount of spirituality in work. I would have meetings and make sure that there were spiritual support on staff whenever we had a community meeting, that there was always spiritual guidance to get anyone through this. And you had to introduce it really slowly because we had been told for 30 years that we were going to hell. And so the fact that we're might be going to heaven is a hard message to kind of permeate with your community, because they've just been told for so many years that they've been condemned to hell. And so over that, this is where I kind of come into the crux of my message. Uh, I observed some key moments that seem to hold true no matter what reader, what medium you're listening to. And the first one that I came up with, and I mentioned before, that you can't let anyone define your faith or lack of faith. They can't condemn you. That is between us and the divine. No one else. You can't tell me that, oh, because you wear green on Sundays, you don't qualify. Uh, and then the 25 years I was watching mediums, and I watch a lot. Oh my, I must watch 15, 20 readings a day, every day. And not once has a message come back to counteract what I was feeling. There was nobody. Father wasn't coming back condemning his gay son. Mother wasn't coming back to condemn her drag son. If anything, mother would talk about the special moments they had when the child was young and just started to get into drag. And I kind of think that if family members come back and if being gay is a problem, I bet you they're going to bring it up. And since they didn't bring it up, I'm assuming it's not a problem. Uh, and it, it assures me that we're okay. That I have equal opportunity that you do. Although the powers that be are trying to convince me that I don't, what they're doing to the spiritual life of people all around the world is because there are 35 million people with HIV right now, and all of them figure that they have been condemned to hell. And I'm here to say, no, I don't think they are. Because if they are, mediums would be coming back with very different messages. And they're coming back with messages of love and support and understanding uh, and all sorts of messages. And we as PHAs have to claim our promise of eternal life. And don't try to deny it. You can, you've spent 50 years trying to deny it in my life, and I tell you, I don't accept it. And no one else should accept it. The next thing I get now, I'm preaching to the converted here, but I'm hoping that there are PHAs that are going to be listening to this message. And it's the message is aimed at PHAs and their loved ones, their surviving families, that because there are, I remember one case, the first case of a friend that died. And his parents came when the son was very sick in the hospital. And at that point, we didn't have an official confirmation as into what it was, but then he died of AIDS. Well, the shame in that family. All the friends were locked out, and they kind of left town in the middle of the dark and left no forwarding address, and they were taking the body home, and they were going to secretly bury the body and not tell their friends that their son died of AIDS. They weren't even going to tell their friends that their son died, because then they'd say, "Oh, of what?" And they didn't want to run the risk of dying, of disclosing that it was AIDS. So I, I'm suspicious that if they are alive today, that they are racked with guilt and shame, and mostly shame, and then guilt. Did I do enough? Uh, And so that's the point of my talk today is that I want PWAs know that their claim to eternity is theirs for the taking, and that families of loved ones don't have to grieve that their loved one is dying in hell. Because I'm sure that there are family members 60 or 50 years later after the funeral still feel as much guilt and shame as when the death took place. Another lesson I learned is we should never be upset if we're not present when our loved one passes away. For one reason or another, we just cannot make it to the death. Uh, whether we're on the other side of the world, whatever. But the message is, if anyone has missed a death, don't take it on as a burden. Your loved ones know what's in your heart, and they know why you're not there. They understand you can't make it. If you can't make it out of spite, well, they know that too. And that's something you have to deal with. But we get so bent out of shape. We spend days and weeks and months next to the bed of someone who's died, and you've been anticipating the death and anticipating the death, and all of a sudden it doesn't happen. And you decide to get a cup of tea and go down to the cafeteria and come back up, only to find out your loved one passed away while you were there. And they can be racked with guilt. Oh my, I should have been there. If only I hadn't left the room. How could I let them die alone? And then this whole spiral just takes place emotionally in their heads. And the thing I want to tell them is your family knows what was in your heart, and they know why you're not there. And in a lot of cases, messages have come back from the medium that they did not want to say goodbye face to face. It would be too painful for them. And it also may be too painful for the person who was sitting and watching in vigil. And it may be too painful for them. So the best thing to do was they depart the world when no one is in the room. And it's easier to say goodbye uh, to nobody. It makes me think when you have somebody who's dying of a terminal illness, they start shrinking their circle of friends. Gradually, as time goes by, their circle becomes smaller and smaller because it's easier to say goodbye to 5 people than it is to 20 people. And that same sort of thing happens when we cross over. We have those same sensitivities. So relieve the burden of that, of you not being present. Your loved ones know your heart. That is the only thing. And concentrate on your grief and healing your grief, and not bring it on. Oh, I should have been there. Why? I'm not a good sister because I wasn't there, and whatever. No, mediums have come back and says, no, you were there for every day, and you were there and kept me happy. If because you weren't there at that last moment doesn't negate all the other stuff that we have done for the deceased. And, the next thought is, well, we've heard this, that we all have a life review. And that life review is of our memories and the intentions behind the memories. My father used to say, it's not what you do, but why you do it. And that has a lot to do with how you're going to fare in the life review. And we all, our life review is we experience we experience our lives through the person's eyes that we have impacted. And we are showing how our actions have impacted that person. And that is, to me, that is our version of judgment. And it's not really a judgment. It, the lessons we have to learn, how we dealt with the people on earth. And that goes into the life lessons that we learn once we have crossed over. And, one of the other things, and one of the most important thing to remember is all children go to heaven, every one of them, whether they've been born, whether they've been aborted, whatever, and even AIDS children. Because I was outraged. I actually drove clergy around in the car one day, and we were having a funeral for an infant who had just died of AIDS. And he's preaching at me that this child, because he's so racked with sin, he's going to go to hell. And, the story became a nightmare. And I'm sitting there. I didn't think much of this priest to start with, but I'll tell you, I lost total confidence in that man after that. So people are thinking that because their child died of AIDS, they're burning in hell, they're rotting in hell. Well, there's not a medium's message that has come back to say that. If anything, the messages coming back are ones of joy and love, and in a lot of cases, the grandmother will come through and she'll talk about, say, somebody was having trouble getting pregnant, and the thing that had the most impact on my thinking is that the grandmother would say, I held the I held the soul of your baby before it came to earth. And you can just see the mother's milk. And then the other thing is, grandmother comes through and tells you that she is with all the babies that were lost in miscarriage or whatever. And the relief of the mother's face when she gets that message is just phenomenal. And I think we always have to expand on it and make sure that people know that their loved ones are in heaven. And one of the interesting things I've ever heard was the mother said, I held the soul of your baby before it came to heaven, before it came to earth. And the birthmark on its forehead was when I kissed her forehead. And like, I've just seen people just lose it when there's that kind of a message. And then one thing I'm looking forward to is when I cross over, I'm going to have instant knowledge of everything. I've always fantasized. I'd love to be able to walk through the basement of the Vatican vault and understand everything I read. Well, when I cross over, I'll be able to do that. unless something happens before it happens. But we have instant knowledge. We know why, we know what ticks and why it ticks. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's about my best way to put it. We understand why he was short on his bill. We understand why he was so bitter to us. We understand things that we didn't know before. And one of the things is we understand why our parents were the way they were. What made them that way? We've often talked that we as parents are only as good as the parents we had and the lessons we learned. And when we cross over, we'll have all those revelations given to us. And I look forward to that. I mean, oh, I have such a thirst for knowledge that I'm sure I'll be there a month or two before I even know what I'm doing because I'm so full of attaining knowledge. And uh, I think that's wonderful just to know that uh, we are. The other thing is that one of the things that I thought is we all we all select the age that we are when we cross over, and a lot of that we are our best when we cross over. But when we come back for visitation with the family during readings, we will come back in a form that they will recognize. And when we come back, uh, when we come back, they, we have the personality we had. A lot of people, when they had the reading, go, "Oh my God, that's just the way he would have said it." And that is to tell the family that they are actually involved in a bona fide procedure here, that it legitimizes the reading. And another thing is, we've talked about this before, that we're souls having a human experience. And from what I've gathered, and I mean, all of this, none of this is schoolwork teaching. So I'm basing all this on what I believe. And we're souls having a human experience. And when we cross back into the realm, we it's I heard it described once when we go back to the realm that it's like our soul has laid down for a nap in heaven and they have a dream of our human experience. And then they wake up from that dream and go back to work in the spirit world. And I thought that was such a nice way of putting it that we kind of understand what process we go through, as well as we had the human experience, and I'm about to throw a little twist into it. Our human experience, we come back to learn lessons for our soul. Uh, pets come to Earth to teach us lessons. And from what I understand, they have a soul too. And I'll tell you, when I first started hearing that, I kind of was skeptic. When I'll hear something and I'll go, well, I'm not sure. I'll see what comes out in the wash down the road. Well, the other day when I was preparing this, I'm listening to a medium that I follow quite a lot and I respect him. And all of a sudden he's talking about pets going to heaven and pets having a soul and pets they have their own life review. And in that life review, they understand why uh, you might have had to put them down or why you couldn't afford medication. They get to understand our human dilemmas. And they came to Earth to teach us lessons about love, uh, unconditional love, they're unconditionally loyal to us, and that teaches us the lessons of love that we can then turn around and teach others, and we benefit from others. And his opinion, and I believe it, is that our pets go to heaven as well. And they're just waiting for us to go there. I always picture that my dog is playing fetch with my dad till I get there. And uh there are lots of mediums that just deal with animals or whatever. And I was always leery of that. And so when I'm walking down the street the other day, I'm listening to this medium in my ear, and I'm thinking, I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure. I don't know. But I put so much stock into other things he says that I thought it can't be wrong or it can't be wrong. And then it occurred to me, when I was in funeral service college, I did two papers. One was on AIDS, and the other one, it was for ethical considerations for funerals. And we had to pick an aspect of grief that we were willing to deal with. And I went to the professor and I said, I want to talk about the grief that we experience when we have the loss of a pet. And he said, oh, I think that's a good idea, but don't tell anyone what you're doing. And so I started my presentation. It was a classroom presentation. And I started, and I gave the title of what it was, and you heard this nervous little giggle from 100 undertaking students, and said to say, "Oh, that can't be serious, who's this fool?" By the time I was finished, I had them crying over 2 year of a goldfish that they lost when they were 3 years old. Uh, we don't attribute when a pet dies, we experience intense grief, and it's almost the equivalent of losing a child. But the only problem is we suffer the grief in silence. Uh, People say, "Oh, it was only a dog. Let the dog die. You'll get another one." No, it's not easy. It's like saying it was only a child. You'll get another one. No, it's not that easy. I still grieve a dog that I lost when I was 15. And the rest of the world does too. And I mentioned that as in to say that we need to start acknowledging when friends of ours have lost pets, that they have really lost a significant member of the family. And we have to give them chance to grieve that pet as much as we give them chance to grieve any loved one that has crossed over. And
Hey, Kevin.
yeah,
I just all of that is very pertinent, and what you're saying about pets is totally spot on. There's a couple people who want to maybe ask some questions too, and we're like about 10 minutes from
oh,
the end. And I also just wanted to highlight a couple of facts about AIDS today, because you were really great about talking about the beginning of the AIDS epidemic and its really personal impacts on people. But I just wanted to kind of remind people of a few things that are current today. And like about 40 million people are living with AIDS today globally, and only 3/4 of those are getting treatment for it. So a full quarter of people living with AIDS today are still not getting the antiviral treatments that are really, really important. And I think the other thing that I want to highlight really quick before we open up to questions is that, in the beginning, people thought about AIDS as just about gay men, and it was never just about gay men. There was always people that were impacted that, were in other demographics as well. And today, 44% of all people dealing with AIDS are women. So, it's really changed. And anyway, I just wanted to kind of highlight a couple of those things to kind of bring it back to, World AIDS Day and that topic, and let people who had a couple questions maybe ask those if we, can do that.
I
I know Charlie had a
I only
question.
wanted to make one more point, and it was the fact that when we cross over, we can't take our wealth, we can't take our possessions. The only thing we take are our memories. Make them good memories. People on their
Yes.
deathbed don't worry about how much money they made or that they didn't make enough. They come back and the message tends to be they didn't love enough, they didn't develop relationships, whatever. And so it's the memories that we take over, make them good memories. It's that simple, and that way, I wrote, make the memories that are gonna last you for eternity. Because that's all you have are your memories when you cross over. And that was about the only point I wanted to make.
It's a good point.
Okay, Kevin, if I can intrude here a moment. First of all, I'd like to thank Steve for hosting, doing a fine job. And Kevin, I'd like to thank you for your hero's journey, which you described to us in detail. And if you're interested, there are several spiritual leaders in the 20th century who taught a lot of the things that you're talking about. You know, that guilt is the problem. That if you hold anybody guilty is a problem. There's good writings on that. And there's another teacher that taught that being one with God is a majority. So you found that majority within yourself when you declared, I am God expressing as one. I am God expressing love. I am God expressing joy. You're declaring a spiritual truth. But the question I have then is I'm very grateful for your being part of our community. The question is I have, what drew you to our community?
Well, I had a reading about 4 years ago, and I was amazed by the reading. Number one, it was all in Calvinistic language, and that is severely fundamentalist and whatever, but it was all in terms that I would relate to. And Madonna Ministry was mentioned 3 times during the reading. So I came home and I looked up Madonna Ministry and I decided to check it out. And the first thing, we've talked about spiritually homeless finding a home here at Madonna. I was like that. I was spiritually homeless. I was comfortable in my spirituality at that point, but I still was not affiliated with the church and personally felt that I wasn't welcome at most churches. And plus, I had to go out of the house in order to go to church, and I don't go there as much. But I found a community that welcomed me, that I grew, I learned. Madonna Ministry did everything for me that a ministry should do. It allowed me to think. It allowed me to come up with my own ideas, and I was comfortable with all that, and I'm really, one day turned into 2, turned into 3, and here I am 4 years later, and happier than a clam spiritually.
Well, thank you, Kevin. We'll make some clam chowder out of you.
I have a good recipe. I'm a maritimer.
Okay.
I had a question early on in your service. You were talking about when you were first opening up and talking a little bit about the early days of AIDS, and you were talking about, this community, and you were also talking about a church earlier in that. Like, just because people are going to see this on YouTube, like, you've identified in other videos and services that you're part of the queer community. I am as well. So when you were talking earlier, you're talking about your queer community when you were talking about the early days of AIDS, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And then you were talking about like typical traditional Christian churches in that early part of the video or today's service as well.
Yes, mainstream, what I would consider
Yeah.
mainstream. Now, I was lucky enough, I didn't mention this, but there was a gay church started in Toronto just about the time that the AIDS crisis started. It didn't start because of the crisis. Like there was not this huge exodus or influx in churches that, oh my God, we're all dying. We need God. There was none of that. It was all a spiritual buildup, and people who are long-term survivors, and that's anyone who was positive before 1995 has a much deeper level of spirituality than, say, even newer patients that are becoming HIV positive, because the old timers, we got to see all the devastation. But there were small pockets of churches that were making a big difference, and I don't want to negate their contribution and their support. I don't like to
Appreciate that.
brush all churches.
I just wanted to make sure that people I just want to make sure that people who are watching this later would understand that earlier on you weren't talking about the Madonna Ministry Church Without Walls. You were talking about because I've also found that this is a very inclusive spiritual community. And I really love that about it. And before we end, I wanted to welcome Sully. Thanks for coming and hanging out today. You can say hi if you want to really quick. We're kind of at the end of things, but
Hi, everyone. Thank you for letting me be here, part of this community. Thank you, Paula, for the invitation. So thank you, thank you,
we hope to see you again, Sully.
thank you.
Yeah, and thanks to everyone for being here today. We're kind of at the end, but like any last questions for Kevin or about like AIDS in the world today or anything like that?
The other thing I'd like,
Cindy, you're muted if you're trying to talk to us.
yeah, there were pioneers that you were unaware of in the century that were teaching spirituality without condemnation, for preaching enlightenment, for preaching oneness with spirit. And so they were there. They were just didn't access them. And so now we are like you, Kevin. We're on a hero's journey that includes all beings, and that love is the primary emotion or feeling or awareness that gets us through. And you mentioned understanding, and that's so important too, to understand the journey and what we're learning, and to learn to love one another.
Very true,
Am I-
Charlie.
Am I
Cindy, you
still
want to say
muted?
something? Yeah.
Yes. Kevin, I just wanted to say, you've touched many people's lives throughout your journey of doing what you've done as a mortician and as someone that's worked very closely with AIDS victims. And I think that what you felt when you found our ministries was that your voice was heard, your voice mattered. And that's something that's very embraceable about our ministries. And I just want to thank you for sharing. That was very informative. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. And I had one last thing I wanted to share about this whole like World AIDS Day thing. I professionally was a sacred sexuality coach and like practitioner where I helped people get more in touch with their own spirit through their sexuality. And since AIDS is like predominantly, passed through sexual contact, I just want to remind us all that like sex and sexuality is not anything to be ashamed of. And like, it was so shamed to so many people in the early days, who they were having sex with. And, our creator created that to be an enjoyable, beautiful, connecting moment with people. And the second leading, cause of AIDS, spreading is like sharing, needles with people. And like addiction is a very challenging issue that is all about people not having connection. And so I just wanted to kind of bring those two thoughts to this conversation as we wrap it up today. Kevin, any last thoughts before we let go today?
No. I think I've expressed my opinion. The only thing is, part of that reading, what was so impactful, just like, the AIDS movement came through in the form of, they said, we're all here waiting for you, and we have a seat and a coffee waiting for you to join our circle. And I think what was the most impactful about that message is that each and every one of you that are involved in any kind of community work or volunteer work for whatever, you each have the same group over there waiting. You have your own group over there waiting for you, loving you on this end, and holding a coffee and your chair for when you get there. So that was a message that I wanted to get across. It's readings are not only for one person, they're for everybody hearing it. And that was
Yeah.
the message
Absolutely.
I wanted to get across to you, that you each have your own organization over there waiting for you and proud of what you're doing.
Beautiful.
And thank
Thank you,
you,
Kevin.
thank you for having the courage to be this vulnerable with all of us. We love you.
Absolutely.
Yes, Kevin. We love you,
Mm.
Kevin.
Yes, Kevin, we do love you.
We really appreciate you always showing up and being here, and you add so much to this community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you everyone for being a part of this today, and everyone who watches this later on YouTube,
Okay.
which Kevin is our beautiful and fantastic volunteer editor for all of that. So thank you for that work as well.
Yeah. And thank you for being in control today, because you know I never could have done that.
And thank you
Okay.
for listening.
Do we know what we're doing next week? Do we have any idea?
I don't know. I
don't
didn't
know
talk to
either.
Nikki about that. She just like texted me at 7 this morning asking me if I could host instead of her today. So
Okay. Well, it'll be a surprise.
yeah. I'm
There you
sure
go.
Nikki will send it out as she always does and let us know what's up next week. So
Cool.
yeah.
Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
Everybody
Blessings.
have a
Everyone have a
blessed
good week.
I love you
Yeah.
all.